And now it's time for April's Film Club feature. So, of course, I'm joined by Malachi Ray Rempen, the filmmaker. Say hello.
Hello, Daniel.
So what film are we reviewing this month?
This month we're taking a look at Der Untergang, or Downfall, 2004 German film by director Oliver Hirschbiegel, which is about Hitler's last few days towards the end of World War II. Most of the film takes place in his bunker and sort of how he slowly goes insane, seen through the eyes of a young, early 20s secretary that he hires.
Yes, so we follow this secretary from the moment at the beginning of the film when she's hired up until the last days in the bunker. And we do loosely follow her, but also the story is built through a lot of the testimonies of the people who work there in the bunker.
Well, the film is actually bookended by interviews with the actual woman who was his secretary during that time, sort of how horrible she feels about what she did, and how well, I won't give away the ending, and sort of her emotional journey, and that is sort of that is the emotional arc of the film, which is a really interesting one.
Yes, and the film stars in the leading role Bruno Ganz, who we have talked about in a recent film club, from a couple of months ago, Der Himmel über Berlin. So he's a well-known actor, and it must have been a pretty difficult role to take on.
And he does it so well. He somehow manages. I mean, Hitler was such a his mannerisms are so over the top and so ridiculous sometimes that he manages to make it seem real and not just overacting, which must be some sort of magic trick, because as opposed to whoever it was that played Hitler in Inglourious Basterds, where it's just sort of this caricature of Hitler and not really, like, you're not expected to believe it is actually him, whereas Bruno Ganz really inhabits him, and that must have been a hard thing to do, especially having to wear that mustache.
Yeah, riding the bus with the mustache on. Yeah, sure. But I mean, it's interesting that you talk about there's a lot of depictions of Hitler which are very caricatured, and also a lot of media outside of Germany have depicted Hitler. But here, Germany was able to tell the story from a German perspective. And yeah, it also, people were worried that the film humanized Hitler too much, which I think is a pretty unnecessary criticism. I mean, the point is to be accurate, and I think it showed him in moments of complete insanity and complete evil. For example, when he basically says that the civilians left in Berlin, we don't really need to care about. If they all died, well, it's their fault. That's essentially survival of the fittest, and if they're not fit enough, then that's their fault. And then there's moments where you kind of see where his charisma was. So, for example, when he's hiring the secretaries at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, the film got pretty much universal acclaim, although it didn't escape some criticism for that exact reason, for it being humanizing Adolf Hitler from Wim Wenders, the director of Himmel über Berlin, who directed Bruno Ganz in that other great film. But I think that's sort of, if you continue to, this is my personal opinion now, we're wandering into Malachi's personal opinion territory. I think if you don't, by making him a monster, by making him a caricature, by making him something subhuman or more than human or sort of inhuman in any way, it implies that it would only happen, like that a Hitler can only ever return if there are brown shirts and swastikas and crazy people with, bad haircuts at podiums shouting wildly, like he did. And by humanizing him, you show that, look, he was just a dude, and and I think that actually furthers the purpose of trying to prevent this from ever happening again, which is the whole point, by not making him seem two-dimensional, by making him seem, he was a dude. He was. Mm-hmm. And this could happen again, and he won't look like Hitler. He won't sound like Hitler. He'll be, someone completely different, and that's what we have to recognize.
Yeah, so there are some moments where you really experience as Hannah Arendt would put it, the banality of evil, how sometimes he smiles and he's friendly, and then sometimes you see him for the evil person that we recognize. And it's interesting to have that experience. But as for the film in general, it's a very tough watch.
It's certainly not a laugh-a-minute comedy.
No.
What's cool about the film is that it sort of what it depicts is Hitler's growing insanity and sort of how he sort of falls apart mentally in the bunker in his last few days there, and how his top commanders, the people who were the most loyal of his entire troop, like of anybody in the world, these were the loyals of the loyals of the loyals, and they kind of looking at each other and being like, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. Like, as Hitler's making these grand plans on this big map and how he's going to bring forces in from the east and the west, and they're trying to protest with him that these forces do not exist. Berlin is falling. They have to evacuate. But Hitler is in his own world now, and that's sort of that's where the conflict arises in the film.
Yes, and for anyone who's interested in the history of the Second World War, it's an absolute must. I mean, it really does depict the horror of the fall of Berlin. I mean, we see at some point Hitler Youth members trying to hold back tanks, and just the...
Well, that's sort of, at the end of the war, there was nobody left. There were no, except kids, essentially, that they had to send out, young girls and boys that they just shipped out to the front, essentially. And but I wouldn't say, it's not really a war movie in the classic sense. I mean, it's a war movie in the way that... Dr. Strangelove is a war movie, in the sense that it all takes place in one room, essentially, or one building, or one sort of area, and you sort of get an experience of the war through what's happening, through the conflicts of this bunker. It's not really a gratuitous in the way that other war movies tend to be, which I like.
Yeah, so I would say that it's a very good film. It's there's a lot of Nazi films from Germany now because, let's be honest, they do sell very well abroad. But this is the one you have to see.
I would say if you're gonna see, if you're gonna see a German take on Nazism, this is the one. This is the one you should see.
Yeah, and it's historically important, and it's fairly accurate as well. So I think it's well worth watching. So, would you recommend this film?
I sure would, Daniel.
Next month, we're going to be doing a double bill, and we're going to do the top-grossing German comedy films by Michael Bulli Herbig, and those are Traumschiff Surprise and Schuh des Manitou. So that's Traumschiff Surprise and Schuh des Manitou are going to be next month's Film Club films.